IB Nation, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. It is Thursday, March 6th, and the offseason is coming close to the part where we get to spring practice, which is a lot of fun. A lot of fun for us college football fans. But today, with Brian still hanging out in the Bahamas, he was nice enough to show Mr. Bender and I where he was at before we got the show started today. But I am joined today by Bill Bender. And I know that Brian and Bill did a lot of shows together during the offseason. He was awesome enough to sit in with us today, and we're going to discuss Notre Dame. We're going to talk about if they're going to be a title contender in 2025. We're going to talk about where Bill ranks them in his way too early top 25. And then we're going to talk big picture other title contenders for the 2025 season. So what teams are kind of in what tier, who's looking on to this season to who's going to be right up there with the Notre Dames of the world. And then if we got time for it today, we're going to run through some of the top quarterbacks returning for 2025. And similar to the teams in contention to playing for a title, there's different tiers of those as well. But before we dive into it, Bill, how are you today, man?
Hey, Trevor, I'm doing great. Thanks for it was real nice of Brian to show us the the view of the ocean, whatever he was laying in. The cabana, is that what those are called? But yeah, he's a lot warmer than we are in Ohio. There's snow on the ground here. I just want it to be spring. You mentioned spring football. I'm like, where's the spring? We're going to need that as well. But no, I'm happy to be on, glad to be on, and thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. We got a lot of good content coming your guys' way today. And we've spent a lot of time, Brian and I, Sean Davis and I, we've spent a lot of time breaking down individual facets of Notre Dame's team so far this offseason. Today, we're going to take a little bit of a step back, and we're going to talk big picture about this team, what we like about this team, what question marks we have. A lot of this, Bill's going to be driving the conversation because a lot of you guys here at IB Nation know where I stand, where Brian stands, where Sean Davis stands. So we're in for a really, really good discussion today, Bill. So a lot of outlets put out their way too early top 25. We here at Irish Breakdown put ours out as well. And we're going to kick off today's show by talking through what yours was and where teams rank, where Notre Dame was ranked, and diving into that. So I understand that you did put together a way too early top 25 though, right?
Yeah, we did back in January like everybody else. But, one thing I encourage people to look at is we also do a composite college football top 25 where I go around and look at, CBS Sports and Dennis Dodd and Brett McMurphy and just kind of try to find a consensus basically. And where did you guys have Notre Dame?
In the Irish Breakdown one, we had Notre Dame, I believe, around third or fourth. I'm pulling it up right now.
Well, why you do that? We had them at 6, and top 5 ahead of them: Oregon, Penn State, Georgia, Ohio State, Texas. Now you could make a case to put Notre Dame over Oregon, and I'll be like, yeah, that makes sense. And I mean, some people would be like, well, why do you have Notre Dame over Penn State? They just beat them. Well, all of those Penn State guys are coming back, with the exception of Abdul Carter. They've got a lot coming back. And then, to me, those conversations with the top 3, I mean, Texas, Ohio State, Georgia, that's going to be most people's top 3. But the fact that Notre Dame loses who they lose, get back what they get back, you lose a quarterback again, and they're still at number 6. I mean, you look across the composite, and I'm just doing it now, their ranking ranges from number 3, which was the Athletic, and number 7, which was Brett McMurphy at the Action Network. So I think we're right around that area where they're going to be anyway.
Yeah, I just went through and I pulled it up. What we did is we put together an IB one based on a point system because Brian and we made our own individual ones. And essentially how the ranking went is whichever teams we put it first got 25 points all the way down to the team that we put at 25th had 1 point. We tally up who was where, what like teams that we had, and we made our own. So our top, as Irish Breakdown goes, Penn State 1, Ohio State 2, Notre Dame 3, Texas 4, Oregon 5, and then Georgia, Clemson, Alabama, Tennessee, and LSU to round out our top 10. So I know that there were some similar ones in there that you had. I also have my list up here as well. But, yeah, no, that's interesting. And I know that you said you were willing to hear out either side of Oregon being ahead or below Notre Dame. What kind of ultimately went into your decision with that one?
I think Oregon has a lot coming back as well. I mean, quarterback is where I start those conversations. What do they have coming back on the offensive line? And for me, they are starting over at quarterback. They're another team that kind of has played the little bit of the transfer roulette deal, but they get Dante Moore. We'll finally get to see what he's about. Evan Stewart's back. They're pretty loaded at receiver. They didn't go too deep into the transfer portal, and I mean, other than offensive line, they will have to rebuild with that. And I think they have the advantage of being in the Big Ten, where they came out and won it in the first year. So they are going to be talented. It's interesting that, like I said, that's a head-to-head argument. If you want to throw Notre Dame ahead of Oregon, I can do that. We typically put Georgia high as well, and I know if you have Georgia behind them, that's fine. They just beat Georgia. I don't need to revisit that, but I think Georgia made some additions in the transfer portal. Gunnar Stockton played well enough in that Notre Dame game that you look at him for next year, that they're still the team to me that, with the accumulation of 4 and 5 star talent that they have, and now that they have the chip of nobody believes in us, I think the Bulldogs will be back in full force next year.
I think it's going to be interesting to see how Georgia handles the loss of everything that they lost on defense. Right. Malachi Starks, Mykel Williams, Nazir Stackhouse, Jalen Walker, Smell Munden, all of those guys. So I'm going to be interested to see what they do to replace them. Now, Georgia on defense has kind of became one of those perennial factories where it's more of a reload than it is a replace and rebuild. And so it's going to be interesting to see what they do there. But you said you had Notre Dame at 6?
Yeah, and I'm good with that. I think, and you probably have been inside this a little bit more than I have in the last month, but it starts with the quarterback competition. I was hoping you could answer for me. I mean, is CJ Carr, is it going to be Angeli? Is this a true quarterback competition? Where does Minchie fit in? I mean, that's a huge, I know we're going to talk quarterbacks later in the show, but yeah, I think for me, I would like to see Notre Dame actually go with a guy that they've developed and not a transfer. And I think that's going to be, they haven't done that the last 2 seasons. I know that's where the game is, but with the hype around CJ, and obviously familiar with him with the Michigan ties and Lloyd Carr and all that, but very interested to see if he's the guy that steps in. I think, for us national writers, we would probably like that because it's better stories, but that's not discrediting what Steve Angeli did or what Minchie could do.
Yeah, the quarterback competition I'm interested to see get started, and it's going to be a shorter sample size in the spring. Notre Dame just released their spring practice schedule, and it's not as many practices, probably something that we forecasted a little bit with it being the longer season, especially for teams like Notre Dame and Ohio State. Texas and Penn State all played 16 games this past season. But to our knowledge, it is going to be a fair and equal quarterback competition. I think Notre Dame is one of the many teams in college football that are kind of going with the more younger developed players than electing to go to the portal. You have teams like Oregon and Ohio State, Notre Dame last season went to the portal to get a proven veteran guy. This season, they're electing to go with a homegrown kid, somebody that's been in the system for the last couple seasons. Outside of the quarterback competition, Bill, what are some of the things that you liked about Notre Dame to put them at 6 above some other teams that you had? I know you had Notre Dame above Clemson, Alabama, teams like that.
If we're being honest, most of the time you do shuffle the top teams in there from the year before. That's a default setting, especially back in January. We made this before the portal was finished, but I think the continuity of having Marcus Freeman, of having several key pieces back on that defense. I know you lose Cross and Mills and Watts, but I saw depth on that defense with guys like Schuler, who has All-American ceiling, Snead, Hinish on the defensive line. You've got a bunch of All-American ceiling players on that side of the ball. Losing Al Golden, not ideal. I don't know, but I just felt like you can shuffle to Chris Ash, and I think I've seen Chris Ash work as a coordinator, and I think he'll do well with those pieces. I love their receivers.
Yeah.
And I think you just need to find somebody to get the ball to them. I've liked Greathouse since he came on, and I know there's been some inconsistency. He had a really good playoff. So I think that's the one position group I'd like to see take off. I know the easiest answer would be to just rave about Jeremiah Love and how good he is. But I think there is a lot more substance to this Notre Dame roster, some depth through recruiting, which I talk about, and the accumulation of 4- and 5-star guys that you should be good.
No, absolutely. I'm glad you brought up Notre Dame's receiver room because that's one that's kind of flying under the radar. Love the addition of Malachi Fields from the portal. Jaden Greathouse returns. With them, it's interesting because they have some Will Pauling. They just released their injury report for the spring. He's going to be in limited participation in the spring, rehabbing some of the injuries that he had last year at Wisconsin, just making sure that he's going to be good to go for the fall. Nothing too alarming, but Malachi Fields won't be here until after the spring session. So
he had a really strong start at Virginia, right? So there you're adding another good piece. I think, he was strong early in the season. So that's what I'm saying. Like whoever's at the controls, okay, yeah, that's good. I always just kind of pencil in that Notre Dame's going to be good at tight end anyway. That's not the best way to do it, but I know they have some talent at the position. And, again, offensive line, they obviously scraped through with some injuries, but when you look at it, and I don't know if there's any position battle that stands out, but there's a little more experience. I think, Anthony Knapp, I'm assuming I didn't look at, he's good for offseason and everything, right?
He was listed on the report as a limited participant.
Which makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, nothing major there. So, if you've got those guys coming back and that much talent on that side of the ball, once you know that the roster is going to be pretty good, then you start to take a little peek at the schedule.
That was one of the questions that I was going to ask you when you were building out your way too early top 25. How much of the schedule played a factor in your decision of ranking teams where?
Well, yeah, it does. Well, if you see a team that has a particularly brutal one, we can obsess about schedules all we want. And then you look at them. Like I think a great example from last year would be Michigan. You knew the schedule was going to be brutal, and they finished 8-5. So, and not that they care right now because they got the last two. That I think if you would have told a Michigan fan, hey, you're going to go 8-5 next year, and then but you're going to beat Ohio State and Alabama, I think they'd take that right away.
Yeah.
So, that's one. But I look at Notre Dame's schedule, obviously, and right off the go, there's no time to wait or settle in. You've got two really good games right off the go. Miami at Miami with Carson Beck. A lot of people are going to be paying a lot of attention to that. You get A&M in the comeback game, and I think A&M with Mike Elko, they're going to continue to build what they have there. And then, you're even going to, to me, at Arkansas is not an easy game. It's not. They'll probably win, but going down to Fayetteville, that's not easy. Boise State on the schedule. This is a beautiful Notre Dame schedule because there's no way you can complain about it, in my opinion. And it's front loaded, which makes the new quarterback and the things that, the questions that you might have about Notre Dame come to light because they're not going to have a lot of time. Although they do have an early bye week. That's weird. September 6th is an early bye week.
Yeah, I think they slotted it that way because the Miami game's on a Sunday.
Okay, and that makes sense.
Yeah. They got the Labor Day Sunday slot. And now it has been slated as a night game as well. And most likely they haven't announced anything. If I were a betting man, I would assume that the Texas A&M home opener will probably also be a night game. So the early bye I'm not as upset about, but then you have six consecutive games that aren't going to be that easy. You go at Miami, bye, home against Texas A&M, Purdue. We'll see what Purdue does this upcoming season. They lost a lot, entirely new coaching staff. Who knows where they're going to be? But then you have at Arkansas, they're playing for the first time in program history. Then they host Boise State for the first time in program history. Then they play NC State. They're one of those teams that you never know with Dave Dorn at NC State. It could be a year where they rattle off 8-9 wins. Maybe they're knocking on the door of 10 wins, or they go 6-6, 7-5. Then they're at home against USC, and then they get their second bye. So the first part of the schedule is going to be interesting to see how that plays out for them.
5 of the 6 at home. I did not realize that. So I'm peeking at it now. But another thing I would watch for then, if they know they have 5 of the 6 at home, I remember a couple years ago, and Brian and I were debating this, like the 4 consecutive primetime games. Mm-hmm. So I'm guessing they're going to have some 330 kicks in there if Marcus Freeman has anything to do about it. And I would anticipate that Arkansas is probably a primetime game. They're going to give Arkansas that kind of spotlight, maybe. So, because of the road game. And I remember, so that 4-game stretch they played a couple years ago, it was like Ohio State. And I just remember by the time they got to Louisville, it was like, well, how many times can you get up at night for these games? And it does add up. So Brian seemed to, and I'm not, he's sitting in the Bahamas in the sun right now, not that he cares, but he kind of disagreed with me on that one in a respectful way. He was like, no, this is Notre Dame. You expect to play. But I do think when you play like 4 straight primetime games as a college kid, it can wear on you a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, you play 4 straight primetime games. I think a big factor is the Duke game right after Ohio State, and then the Louisville game were back-to-back night road games. I think that was a factor. I'm pretty sure all teams were ranked as well at the time that they played. Louisville either was ranked or then was ranked after they beat Notre Dame. I can't remember if they were 25th or not in that matchup. But that's one of the things I like about Notre Dame's schedule this season is they don't have any back-to-back road games.
Well, yeah, and you talked about that, and I think this schedule, the Notre Dame rule to me in the playoff is they go 10-2 against this schedule, they should be in the playoff. They probably will be in the playoff. I don't know. Some people think 11-1 is the requirement. It is front loaded. You look at the back half, and that's kind of that ACC portion of the schedule. Don't know how many times I look at it and see Stanford, I forget that they're in the ACC. Yeah. But that's that part of the schedule where they could build up, and if they go 11-1 or 10-2, they should be right back in the playoff. The big question for me nationally, and I think I say that tongue in cheek because I'm right here in Ohio, is what the national championship game told me is there's still a level layer to go, because you could see in that game in particular that pretty early, even though I know Notre Dame had the good drive to start the game, Ohio State, the level of athlete that they had, the 4- and 5-star guys, they executed well too. And when Ohio State's executing at that level, Notre Dame wasn't quite good enough to win that football game. They did fight back. I thought it was a great step for the program. It wasn't a blowout on a national stage, but Ohio State, as far as an operation, might still be a little bit of cut above.
One of my takeaways from the national title game, it's in the similar boat. It's almost on the flip side of the coin. Is in previous years, we talk a lot about closing the gap at Irish Breakdown. We talk about how far away is Notre Dame closing the gap from the Ohio States of the world, from the Georgias of the world, the teams that are perceived to have the better top-end talent. A lot that went wrong for Notre Dame in that game, I believe to be schematic. Now, especially on defense. Now, look, we're talking about a receiving core that has Jeremiah Smith, Emeka Egbuka, Carnell Tate, Brandon Innes, and they're loaded. Some of the things that I believe that Al Golden schemed up for that game just wasn't true to what Notre Dame had done all season. And it left a lot to be desired from somebody sitting in my shoes, because if you're going to go down swinging the way that you had all season long, don't do something different because of the level of talent that Ohio State had. So I think there's a discussion to be had around, did Ohio State's level of talent on that team cause Notre Dame to do something differently? Is that what the mindset was going into that game? But that's a good segue into the next question. It's just, did the 2024 season as a whole change your view on Notre Dame as being a title contender? Obviously, they played for the national title in 24, but where are you at as far as that goes?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think I've always kind of profiled Notre Dame like Michigan. They've had their ups and downs like Michigan. There was a reason why that rivalry was so good while it was like that, and they had a very I remember early last season telling Brian that, hey, this roster with this defense, it reminds me of the Wolverines of the year before. A lot of veterans, keeps things in front, doesn't allow big plays. You could exchange Xavier Watts for Mike Sanders still, and that's what they had. And for them to go make that run under Marcus Freeman, the Sugar Bowl, and the resiliency that the kids showed after the attack the day before or the day of, right? So you push that game back. They showed a lot of maturity. The Penn State comeback, a lot of maturity. I think Marcus Freeman's only building toward a national title. Now, is it going to be easy? No, because Ohio State's had a head start, and that's the one program. If you're looking in the Midwest, whether you're Notre Dame, Michigan, Penn State, Nebraska, I guess Nebraska is a little more Midwest, true Midwest, but you're still chasing Ohio State as a program. And I think Notre Dame's cut that down a little bit. And as frustrating as those losses to the Buckeyes are the last couple of years, they've shown that they can play with them for 4 quarters. And like you said, I think there's something to what you said, a little bit of execution schematics. Did they play their best game? No. But they also turned a potential blowout into it was a tight game before Jeremiah Smith makes a catch late in the game. But point being, yeah, Notre Dame is in my opinion, is at the stage of, in this format, they should be a playoff regular. What does that playoff regular mean? Of course they want to try to win a national championship, but I think they come off of last year in a much better spot than, say, Penn State. That's why that game was so important. Penn State's still waiting for their national championship from the 80s too. And, they are in an all-in year though. So I think while the pressure is going to be on Penn State this year, and there will be a lot of pressure on the Nittany Lions to finally break through, I think Notre Dame faces less pressure, believe it or not.
I think a lot of the challenges that they overcame last year, ending the 31-year major bowl win drought, that monkey's off the back. Because for people like you and I, people like Brian that sit down and dive into the teams, we're sometimes the people on the flip side of the coin that get ridiculed for saying, hey, Notre Dame can be a title contending team based on what they have coming back, the coaching staff that they have, the recruits and transfers that they have coming in. But for a lot of the national media, for a lot of the fans across college football, they had to see it. And I think that for Notre Dame is what was accomplished last season. Beating Georgia, the SEC champs in the Sugar Bowl, beating Penn State in the Orange Bowl, the runners-up in the Big Ten, and at one point in time making it a competitive game in the national championship. Because even when Notre Dame made it to that stage, there's a lot that just assumed Ohio State was going to do to them what they did to Tennessee in the first round and what they did to Oregon in the Rose Bowl. So it's going to be interesting to see how they handle that moving forward. I know we're going to talk about this in the second segment of the show today, Bill, but do you view Notre Dame as a title contender early on, as of today, for 2025?
Yeah, because I think any one of the teams in the top 9, and I would stop that line at Alabama, are really interesting right off the go. Alabama, LSU falls under a little bit of boomer bust for me, both of them. And they are boomer bust teams heading into next year. LSU does have Garrett Nussmeier back. Alabama, it's Alabama talent. They still have enough of the Saban guys, and I think Kellen DeBoer bounced back a little bit. But everybody top 7 up, probably be the ones you really take a look, at least in ours, to me. It starts with Clemson at 7, Oregon at 6, Notre Dame at 5, Georgia 4, Penn State, Ohio State, Texas. I mean, those are the 7 that I'm looking at that right off the go, yeah, they could compete for a national championship right away. And Notre Dame proved that they could go through that run. I think Clemson, I talked about them on another hit this morning, and I know we'll talk about Cade Klubnik some on the show. I mean, they're going to be really good. And they're in that ACC conference where the advantage is they should be the best team in the ACC. I like where that program's going, and they continue. Dabo's using the portal now. Nobody's making fun of him anymore. So, when you have Cade Klubnik back, and Cade played well in the playoff, and they've got Tom Allen at defensive coordinator now, I think they're going to be a fun team.
Clemson's a really intriguing team for me. I saw a graphic put out. It might have been by Pro Football Focus, but they put out a graphic about the number of snaps played by true freshmen in 2024. Notre Dame was obviously up there. They were somewhere in like the 2,400 snap range played by true freshmen. Clemson was in like the 4,000 range. They were number 1 by a lot. So they return a lot. On their defensive line, they have a lot of young talent coming back. I think their entire receiving core is coming back. So Clemson, I'm with you. Clemson's one of those teams that I'm going to have my eye on. But obviously, we're in the same boat. I think Notre Dame has the chance to make it back to – I think in this day and age of the expanded playoff, the conversation is always going to be making it back to the semifinals. Because I think once you get to that stage, it's a small sample size, but what this season taught us is that once you reach the semifinal stage, it's kind of up for debate of who's going to make it to the national title scene. It's kind of like in the March Madness tournament. You talk about the road to the Final Four. And then after that, it's who has the best day on that day, because the 4 elite teams made it to the finals. And so I don't know if you view the 12-team playoff that way in college football, but small sample size, that's kind of how I'm starting to look at it a little bit.
Yeah, it's different, and it is. And I think, to me, it's funny you say that. When they got to the semifinals, I was kind of like, if this were basketball, you're hanging a banner.
Mm-hmm.
You're saying, hey, we're a Final Four football team. And to me, that's like the equivalent of you when you went to the 14 playoff. Okay, these are the 4 best teams in the country. Were they the 4 best teams by the rankings of the regular season? I don't know. I did think Ohio State had the most talent. I think Notre Dame, aside from they erased that Northern Illinois loss, because in November I thought they were playing the best football of anybody in the country. Penn State was a really quality team. It's not, they did take advantage of an easier route based on the fact that it's not seeded correctly. I would say that. And but they won the games. It would have been a bigger story had Penn State lost to Boise or lost to SMU.
Yeah.
And then, Texas, they runner up in the SEC. They earned their way through and played very well in the 2 games that they got. So, and a little bit of luck to beat Arizona State, but they won the game. So I was very cool with the teams that they had in that format. No problem.
Yeah, it ended up being what we hoped that it would have with the expanded playoff. I thought it added more value to the regular season as well, because you had teams like Miami and Alabama and BYU and Kansas State kind of putting the nail in their own coffin in the month of November, preventing them from playing in their conference championships or getting a bid into the playoffs. And so I think that's something that we'll continue to see moving forward. With Notre Dame, I know we talked about you see them being a title contending team, but specifically for their ceiling, what do you view as their ceiling preseason in 2025 after taking a look at their schedule and what they have coming back?
I mean, you can ask for the same thing. It's not as perfect. I think there were some veteran faces on that defense that you have to replace. But it told me, like, Riley Mills going down against Indiana, and then they still played well on that side of the ball. Told me that they've got the depth there. Xavier Watts is a big loss. There's no question. But yeah, I think it really how they handle the front loaded side of this. What happens if they lose to Miami and then they turn around and lose to Texas A&M? Do they have the concentration to win 10 games after that? That's something that they showed they could do last year. But Miami, that's a tough game on the road to start the season. Very intrigued by Miami and Carson Beck and what that's going to look like. And yes, they had kind of a breakout season of sorts, even though they were kind of the team that nobody really believed in when they were doing it. So I think there's a lot to prove for Miami. I'm always happy to relive the old games between Miami and Notre Dame, and I think that's going to be a big game there. But in terms of ceiling, yeah, you could say national championship is the ceiling. Getting back to the national championship game is the ceiling, but there's no guarantees that you can go on a run like that again. So I would say, getting back to the playoffs should be the expectation. And then from there, when you got to win 4 games, some of it depends on the draw, where you're at that point in the season. And I think it's funny. I think 10-2 against that schedule would be comparable to 11-1 last year. Do you get what I'm saying? Like,
yeah,
it would be the same to me if you maybe if you stub your toe somewhere, but there's a lot of ranked teams on there, because I think USC will be better as well.
Yeah. One of the things that we talked about on this show a couple of weeks ago was that it's not like 24 where Notre Dame loses early and then they have to rattle off 10 consecutive wins, because that loss ideally is not coming to a Northern Illinois type of team. And that's the difference. Ohio State showed that they can have 2 Power 4 losses in a season, one being close to Oregon and one being a game against Michigan at home that they just simply shouldn't have lost. But they showed that you can lose in the last week of the regular season to a 6-5 team at the time and go on to win the national championship. And so there's going to be no hypothetical nail in the coffin. Let's say Notre Dame goes 1-1 against Texas A&M and Miami. I don't see it, to your point, being a situation where then they have to rattle off 10 or 11 straight wins to have a thought of making the playoffs. Now, we can have the conversation around what's it going to look like for them to host, what's it going to look like for them to be one of the 5 through 8 seeds with 2 losses. Some of that just depends on what happens around them in the rankings. But I'm with you. Yeah, I think Notre Dame, a 10-2 season with this schedule is very, very comparable to what an 11-1 year was for them last year. So that's where I'm at. I'm in the same boat as you are. Absolutely.
Yeah, and you bring up an interesting point. And one thing that I always talked about in the 4-team era was we never saw, I don't think we saw a 2-loss team make the playoff in the 4-team. Will we see who's going to be the first 3-loss team to make the 12-team playoff? And that was the thing. As long as Notre Dame, like I said, they probably can't go 9-3. That's kind of the standard they go about. But I think last year proved that like you said, there's no nail. I was there at Ohio Stadium, and not too many people. You thought, okay, they're in the playoff, but there's no way in the world they're making a national championship run. I mean, especially when you saw 30% of the stadium have Tennessee fans with it in it the next game, but they did, and it does have a little bit of an NFL playoff feel to it. That nobody ever mentions the seed of the teams in the Super Bowl. I've never said the number 1 Chiefs versus the number 2.
It's a good point.
We know because you want home field advantage, but like I'm trying to think, Philadelphia, they didn't have home field last year. They were 2 seed, and Kansas City obviously was 1. But yeah, we don't talk about the seeding. And I think we'll continue to go in that direction, especially if we expand the playoff.
I agree. One thing before we get to the final question here in the first section, I've had some conversations about this on this show, off air with some friends. Do you think that Ohio State, with their final loss of the regular season coming at home against Michigan, do you think that they benefited from the teams around them also losing, like Alabama dropping that game to Oklahoma, BYU losing at the end of the regular season as well, Miami dropping the game to Georgia Tech? Do you think that played a factor in whether Ohio State played a home game, or do you think they still would have hosted, let's say, if Alabama doesn't lose to Oklahoma on the road by 21 in a really ugly game, and Miami doesn't drop that game to Georgia Tech late in November? Do you think that Ohio State still hosts with a loss to Michigan?
Probably not. I mean, I don't know that they, if we fix the rankings, they would have hosted. They would have been a top 8 seed, but I don't know if they're hosting in that event for sure. I think you would have had Alabama as a top 8. You probably would have had Miami. They'd have been 11-1. Maybe they drop a little bit, but I think they would have been 11-1 going to the ACC championship game, and probably had a strong argument to be in the ACC, like SMU and Clemson. Both of those teams end up going. So it slides Ohio State down a little bit further because that loss was so visceral. It was so real. The aftermath was a disaster. So probably not. And that's why, again, I'm a big advocate of let's see this thing 1-12 by how they should. And that includes Notre Dame. Like if Notre Dame's 4, let them have a bye. I don't care that they don't. That's where I'm at, because I'm okay with them not having it in this format. But if you seed it properly, which we're not doing, it makes it that much easier to put the teams in the right spots. I always use this example. Had we seeded this properly last year, the 8-9 game is Boise State, Indiana, which is like the football equivalent to what the 8-9 game will be in basketball here in a week when we watch, who do I have? UConn and like New Mexico.
Yeah.
It's a great game because somebody gets to win it and you get to tell that story a little bit longer. I think that would have been a much better matchup than was our 8-9 game Tennessee, Ohio State. That wasn't an 8-9 game. That shouldn't have been an 8-9 game.
No. I'm with you. And I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens with conference championships moving forward, because all the conference winners were bounced in their first game. And the 2 teams that made the national title didn't play in the conference championship at all. Not even won it. Notre Dame, obviously, because they're not in one, and Ohio State did not travel down to Indianapolis to play in the Big Ten championship. So moving forward, I definitely think that's going to be interesting. Bill, the final question that we have in the first part of the show is what are some of the top questions that you have about Notre Dame going into the spring? I know spring practice is right around the corner. I think it's less than 2 weeks away. So what questions do you have about this team that you want to see answered?
Well, I mean, just offensive line. But offensive line is such a boring answer because I can't begin to detail like okay, what is the guard pulling correctly? You know, what is their pass protections? Are they slide? I can't answer those questions, but is their offensive line really good? You know, quarterback's too obvious, but we'll be every national outlet will be doing quarterback battle type stuff in the spring. That's the first position you watch, and it is. I mean, like CJ Carr, is it Angeli? Angeli had just an amazing pinch hit performance in the bowl game against Penn State, and you know, who's that guy that steps up and takes the reins at Notre Dame? I mean, that's the first question, the most obvious question. And in the meantime, if we're being honest, I'll be peeking in on that Notre Dame lacrosse team. So with my kid, we've probably watched more Notre Dame and Penn State and Ohio State lacrosse in the last month than anything else.
No, that's awesome. Notre Dame lacrosse is definitely a good way to pass the time because they are really, really good again. But I'm with you. We have a lot of the same questions going into the spring. Offensive line, it's not so much for me the performance, it's just who's going to line up where. Because you have a kid like Anthony Knapp coming back, started 15 games as a true freshman at left tackle, struggled at times in pass protection, was a strong run blocker. Then you have a guy like Charles Jagasaw, who was the slated left tackle to start the season, come in at right guard against Penn State midway through the second quarter, and then he started at left tackle in the national championship against JT Tuimoloau, and he had a very good performance against Ohio State sack leader on that team. And so it's going to be interesting to see where either of those kids line up. I have questions at center. Their starting center to start the year last year is still out this spring. He's still rehabbing a torn ACL. So a lot of questions on who's going to be where. Quarterback competition is one for me. And then the other big one is just what's the defense going to start to look like with Chris Ash? I have confidence in Chris Ash. I can't say that I'm screaming confidence because we're coming off of a defensive coordinator performance 3 years with Al Golden, who put together a tremendous time at Notre Dame. They still have all the pieces on defense. I think me, along with a lot of others, are just anxious to see what a lot of it's going to look like. And then just what the defensive line is going to look like and what that rotation will be, especially off the edge. So those are some of the main questions that I have about Notre Dame. But, Bill, that's going to do it for the first part of this show today. Glad to get some of your insight on Notre Dame and where you see them. And now we're going to kind of broaden the scope out to the rest of college football and where we see the national title contenders being elsewhere around the country. But, folks, before we get there, please be sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell. Share this podcast with your friends and family, anybody that you know loves college football and Notre Dame as much as you do. And as always, the best way to support what we do here at Irish Breakdown is subscribe to the premium message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. All right, Bill, we're going to continue to widen the scope here a little bit. And we spent the first part of this show talking about Notre Dame specifically and where we saw them in the grand scheme of national rankings, where they're at as of today before spring practice kicks off. But now we're going to kind of broaden the scope and look at other title contenders across the country. And I don't know how you have done it, but it's kind of sorted out into 3 different groups. And I think that's a fair conversation because it's always, you have the teams off the top of your head that we believe to be title contending teams. Talked about it a little bit in the first segment. The Texases, the Ohio States, the Notre Dames of the world, the Oregons, Penn States. Then you start getting into your, tier 2 group and then your tier 3 group. So walk me through starting out. You kind of have the regulars that are always there. Who are some of the regulars in your mind right now that are leading title contenders for this upcoming season?
Well, they play in week 1, Texas, Ohio State. I mean, Ohio State with the amount, Ohio State is, when you talk about national championship teams, certain programs are a little bulletproof. Ohio State's bulletproof to me in terms of they're going to have enough talent back on that roster to win a national title. I think the expectation is there'll be more bumps than last year, and there should be. I mean, they're going to have 13, 14, 15 guys drafted. And an article I need to do, Trevor, is we could rewind it back 5 years, okay? Who can truly say we don't rebuild, we reload? And Alabama could do that with Saban, where it was like, yeah, they're going to have a machine back. Georgia could do that 4 years ago. But I think once you have 13 guys go and then 12 guys go, and that's what hit them last year. Michigan had, double-digit guys go. Michigan can't sustain like that. You can't have 15 NFL players leave the roster at Michigan and then expect, and LSU had the same thing happen in 19, which is probably the best college football team I've ever seen that I can remember. Like, you can say this team, Miami in the 2000s, sure. Notre Dame in the 70s. Yeah, that's fine. LSU in 19 is the best team I've ever seen in person. And they lost a bunch of guys and they couldn't sustain it. They lost potentially 3 Pro Football Hall of Famers in Jefferson, Chase, and Burrow. So how do they withstand that? Ohio State, I think there'll be more bumps than usual. But anytime you can base an offense around Jeremiah Smith and a defense around Caleb Downs, you do okay. Texas with Arch Manning, we're going to have a hard time controlling the hype for them. They did lose a lot of pieces, though. They lost receivers. They lost tackles. They lost some key players on the defensive side of the ball. Who's he throwing to? You lost Bond and your tight end and the Kelvin Banks. So there are a lot of pieces at Texas to fill. But I do think Sarkisian has done a good job. It's very comparable to what Marcus is doing at Notre Dame, that he's young. I think he gets it. And he's not screwing up a program with a ton of resources. So I do like Sark. He faces a lot of criticism, I think, other than his goal line play calling against Ohio State last year. But, those are the two that stick out. Georgia coming back with what they have. Oregon, Notre Dame, and then Penn State's not a regular national championship contender for me. They are a very good team, but they still, like I said, I saw a couple of comments in here and I wanted to respond a little bit. I do think Penn State does face more pressure than Notre Dame. Notre Dame obviously still has a lot of pressure on the program, but Penn State's in that all-in year. Aller came back. Singleton came back. Allen came back. A couple defensive guys came back. So when you're doing all that, and they got Jim Knowles, by the way, and they play Ohio State. So the heat around that game is going to be off the charts next year. And I think that's the list of teams that I'm looking at right off the bat that I'm like, okay, if I'm picking a national champion, it'd probably be among one of those 6.
There are some teams in there, and I'm in the same boat as you are because we have very, very similar top 6s, top 7s. Like I said, my top 7 goes Penn State, Texas, Notre Dame, Ohio State, Clemson, Georgia, Oregon. That's my top 7. So we have a lot of similar teams, almost identical teams to who we believe can be in contention to play for a national title. Penn State is almost in the situation that for different reasons, they're in a very similar situation to what Ohio State was going into this past year. James Franklin has kind of been, he's coined this reputation of being unable to win those big games. He fell short a little bit in the Big Ten championship game. Now, I will say Penn State did impress me in that loss in the Big Ten title game. I filed under the people that said, look, if this game turns into a shootout, it might turn into a boat race because that's Oregon's style of game. And Penn State was able to hang in there with them. They won 2 postseason games, but with some of the earlier postseason games, what I do is I kind of go back and I try to look at it from the frame of, if this were a regular season game, would I view it as big of a win, or am I looking at the stage as the bigger win, not the opponent? So, for example, a lot of people after Notre Dame beat Indiana, a lot of people were coining it as one of the biggest program wins in history since 1993. And it's like, well, hold on. IU had a really good season, but if they played on October 28th inside of Notre Dame Stadium, not in the first round of the playoffs, would we still view it as that, or would we just view it as like, okay, this was a good win?
Right.
And that's kind of how I viewed Penn State's couple rounds of the playoffs. Beating SMU at home. SMU is a really good team, but I don't think it was enough to get the monkey off of James Franklin's back of he can win the big one now. Because the big ones he faced last season, Ohio State at home, didn't win that. Oregon on a neutral site field in the Big Ten championship, didn't win that. And then Notre Dame in the Orange Bowl in the semifinals, and he didn't win that one either. So I'm in the same boat as you are with Penn State. They're in a similar boat with how much they have coming back to what I believed Ohio State did this past year. Everybody looked at Ohio State's roster like they're very experienced. They have the talent. Wide receiver skill position is going to be a question for me with Penn State, especially with them losing Tyler Warren, their best downfield passing weapon. But you look at Aller coming back. Andy Kotelnicki's going into his second year at offensive coordinator. They got Jim Knowles. They have both of their 1,000-yard backs coming back. I think this is a make or break year for them in that can they finally get through that threshold?
Well, and it's from the Big Ten slant. It's they just can't beat the Buckeyes, man. Trevor, I've watched every way that they've lost to the Buckeyes since they beat them in 16 on a play where they probably should not have won. They block a field goal. Grant Haley runs it back, and that's their last win there. And then Michigan beating them the way that they have. Didn't play Michigan last year. Didn't play them next year. Or this year coming. They do play Oregon and Ohio State, and I think you bring up a good point. Those are the games in which he'll be judged. I was like, okay, yeah, you should beat SMU. You were impressive. You should beat Boise State. You were impressive. You should have beat Notre Dame, quite frankly. You were up 10-0 and running the ball like down their throat, and then they forgot how to run the ball in the second half. Great adjustments by Notre Dame in that game, by the way. But I do think there's some level of pressure on them. So they would be, as I know we have them ranked number 4, but it's like, I need to see you do it. I would go down and say Clemson's a national championship contender. I could say that because I know, 1, they're probably going to win their conference. 2, they have Cade Klubnik, who I know we're going to, in that third, he has 36. It snuck up on me today. I was prepping for this podcast. Brian would be proud. Yes, I prepped. 36 touchdowns, 6 interceptions last year. I would have never guessed. If you'd have said ACC quarterback, 36 TD passes, 6 interceptions, I don't know if I'm guessing him first. I was trying to think. I would probably said like Cam Ward, Kyle McCord, somebody else. No, it's Cade Klubnik. He had really good numbers, and he played well in the playoffs. So I could rope them in there, and I'm not a Dabo hater like everybody else. I think he's done a fantastic job there. 5 years ago, I used to tell people what he's done at Clemson was the best story in college football in the last 50 years. To build them into a national championship like powerhouse that was going back, and they're still around. So I don't think Clemson's quite dead yet.
I'm with you. I was my claim to fame is I was the lone IB staffer that picked Clemson to win the ACC over SMU.
Good call.
Thank you. And it was one of those where I was like, look, at the end of the day, I like Clemson's talent, on-field talent. It's young. You have Peter Woods on the defensive line. Their receiving core was really young. Cade Klubnik had an up and down season up to that point. Statistically, he had a good year. But just in some of the bigger moments, it was just kind of, the Louisville game was kind of fresh in my mind of like, okay, that game just wasn't competitive. But then I started thinking about it, and it's like, look, Dabo Swinney is one of the most experienced coaches in all of college football. He is until Ryan Day won the national championship, one of 2 active coaches with a national championship ring. Excuse me. And so when I was going through and I was thinking about it, I was like, look, Miami's had a fun season with Cam Ward. They've had question marks. They were closer to losing some games than they were to being 10-2 at the end of the regular season. The ACC still runs through Clemson. And that came to fruition in the ACC championship game. But I'm with you. I mean, even in the big moments, Cade Klubnik against SMU in the ACC championship game passed for 4 touchdowns, 262 yards. And then against Texas in a loss on the road, he passed for 336 and 3 touchdowns.
Yep.
And so that was my one pause with Cade Klubnik before the postseason was, can he perform in big games? Because earlier last year, they opened the season against Georgia, did not have a good performance. Against Louisville at home, not a good performance. Threw the ball 56 times that game. And then against South Carolina, not great passing. He rushed for 62 yards and 2 touchdowns. But I needed to see that big game performance from him, which gives me a lot of confidence coming into this season of what Clemson can do and make a run at the title.
Yeah, and it's funny. I went back and looked at my college conference championship predictions since you said that, and I had SMU winning 34-31. Well, Clemson won 34-31, so I was close. I just went the field goal the other way. Yeah, and I think they're a team that's kind of my cutoff point. Then you get into, okay, what's the next tier? And here's the next tier. And I know Brian's top 25 probably didn't have any SEC teams in it. Did he ban the SEC from his top 25? No. I will say that behind his back because I would say it to his face. I'd be like, how many did you ban the SEC? Because we've gone back and forth on that for years. I have like that SEC clump next, the Alabama, LSU, Florida's getting a lot of love. South Carolina with Lenora Sellers. I'm reading stories about him in the Heisman hype, but I think the SEC is a victim of Trevor, that they don't maybe have a dominant team other than a Georgia, maybe, or a Texas, maybe. Alabama and LSU feel very boomer bust to me. Like they could go 9-4 again, and I wouldn't be surprised. And that's something Brian is right about, that the quality there with the SEC, maybe there's not that dominant team. And then when they lose, we've got to hold them accountable for those losses, which we did last year. And we held Alabama accountable and South Carolina and Ole Miss. But, sorting out that second clump of SEC teams is pretty tough to do. And if you look at our top 25 anyway, I think 8, 9, 10, 11, Miami's 10. And then you got 11 Florida, 12 Tennessee. So a lot of the same schools that they're hard to sort out. So it's hard to say that you're an SEC championship, national championship contender if I can't sort you out from the other 4 teams in your kind of tier that you're talking about.
Sure. I'm with you. We have a lot of similar teams in the top 25 and where they're at here. This is my clump of SEC as well. I had LSU at 8, South Carolina at 9, Alabama was 11, Tennessee was 10, Miami was 12 for me. And so I go through and I look at it, and I'm with you. LSU was the team that was one of our more hot topics of discussion when we released ours, because Brian had LSU at 14th. I had them 8th. And basically what we had talked about was we sorted LSU out based on, we took opposite ends of the spectrum. We believe that LSU will fall somewhere in that 8 to 14 range next season after it's all said and done. I took the higher end of that spectrum, and Brian took the floor of it. But LSU's a weird team for me, because they're one of they have the talent on their roster that they could be an SEC title contender up there with Georgia. But they could also be one of those teams where it's like, all right, well, heading into the second week of November, they're 6-2, and that we don't know how that's going to turn out. One of the things that I did say, having watched him coach a team for 11 years up close, was Brian Kelly is also just kind of randomly due for one of those good seasons. At Notre Dame, he went 8-5, 8-5, 12-0. And then leading up to the 2018 season, in 2016, he went 4-8. And then he went 9-4. And then he went 12-0. And so it's one of those where could we see the same thing down in Baton Rouge? It's interesting because one of the other things that we're going to find out very quickly as the season starts is how good is Clemson and how good is LSU. They open the season at Clemson, and that's going to be a really, really fun game to pay attention to. That one is on Saturday the 30th.
Yeah, you that's the thing. You're on this. I think our top. You'll have to send me yours, but I'm guessing our 25s are very similar because I have them 9, and everything you said. Just to build on that, they were very active in the portal, very active. Other than Ole Miss, maybe the most active team in the transfer portal. You do have Garrett Nussmeier coming back, and he is one of the returning passing leaders, which you take that with a grain of salt. That can just mean that he played in a lot of games and a lot of other quarterbacks left, which there's some truth to that as well. But their early season schedule's everything, man. They play Clemson, they play Florida, they play Ole Miss, and all of that before October 1st. So let's play that out, that they lose to Clemson, Florida, and Ole Miss, and LSU's sitting there with 3 losses before October 1st. It'll get hot there if that happens, because of Brian Kelly and the fit matters argument that I always make, that when you plop, a guy from Massachusetts in the South, that it always matters. There's a reason why Dabo Swinney doesn't coach at Michigan State. You know what I mean? Like, fit always matters, and fit matters down there. Though you can make the argument they won with less miles than Nick Saban, but still, Brian Kelly, personality, cringy social media moments. It always gets. They need to learn how to, Trevor. They need to learn how to schedule an opener. Yeah. To schedule like Louisiana Tech, schedule UL Monroe in your opener. They haven't won an opener since 2019, which is mind-boggling to me.
Wow.
So they've lost to Mississippi State. They lost to UCLA. They lost to I believe Florida State twice. And then they lose to USC in shocking fashion last year.
Wow.
So they need to schedule just go 1-0, Brian. Start there. Go 1-0. Then you don't have to make a weird, cringy press conference comment or slam on a table. Or he's had some moments in September, and that is not an easy game to open with.
No, definitely not. And with this schedule, I mean, even after October 1st, it doesn't get easier from there. Right out of the bye, you host South Carolina, and then 2 weeks after that, you're hosting Texas A&M. Then you get a bye, then you play Alabama on the road, and then they end the season at Oklahoma. Now, I don't know what Oklahoma is going to be this season. Right now, that program is on fire a little bit, not in a good way, and so we're going to see what that ends up looking like. But I mean, against that schedule, if Brian Kelly and LSU they eke out a 10-win season at the road or on the road against Clemson, home against Florida, at Ole Miss, at Alabama, home against A&M and South Carolina, I think they're going to be a playoff team. But that's where their ceiling is for me. And Alabama is another interesting one because their schedule is also not that easy. They host Wisconsin, they're at Georgia coming off of a bye. They're home against Tennessee. That game, I think there's going to be a lot of players on that team that remember what happened down at Neyland Stadium this past season. You know, they host Alabama. Their schedule is a little bit easier than what LSU's is. They don't have Texas on here. They don't have Ole Miss on here. They do play at South Carolina, but Bama's going to be another one of those teams for me that I'm going to have my eye on. How do you view them going into this season?
They had a lot of transfer in and out, and you were going to have that. I think as Kalen gets, it's crazy to think that they might be better when Kalen gets his guys that didn't play for Nick Saban. That is an analogy because once you play for Nick Saban, you're playing for another coach. You inevitably, with 18 to 22-year-olds, they probably had some guys check out. That happens. I think quarterback position with Ty Simpson's really interesting. Their receiving core is really good. I mean, around Ryan Williams, they're going to be good there, and I think their defense will be better around Tim Keenan. But you said it, the tough early season schedule, and then the grinder in the SEC. And I think there's probably, if I had to put up a Twitter poll, who has more pressure, BK at LSU or Kalen at Alabama? I would still say Kalen because, you're still the guy that followed the guy, and then I've seen that with, Zook following Spurrier, how quickly it could go wrong. I mean, I guess Ohio State's the only one that they just got it. They just fall into guys, right? How do you go from, Tressel to Meyer? I know the Fickle year was in between. Then you go from Meyer to Day, and it just works out for them. But I think there's a lot of pressure on Alabama this year. And then again, those two are the boom or bust, and then they're sandwiched around kind of the hype teams, Florida and Billy Napier with DJ Lagway. Another team with a brutal September and a brutal schedule. Who's made Florida's schedule the last 2 years? If I was Billy Napier, I'm firing that guy. And then Tennessee and South Carolina, like I said, they got young quarterbacks that we're excited about. Nico Iamaleava, even though they lost to Ohio State, I came away impressed with him. He's a tough kid, taking hits in the cold without Dylan Sampson. Going to continue to get better. And then Lenore Sellers at South Carolina, there's a lot of hype around them. So, that's that interesting, tough to sort out group of SEC teams. And any one of them, like you said, the ceiling's probably, of the 5, Alabama can make a run. I always believe that. The rest of them just feel like playoff teams to me.
Yeah. Of that bunch of the Floridas, of the South Carolinas, I do think Alabama potentially has the highest ceiling. I think bringing back his old offensive coordinator from Washington is going to be huge for them as well. Mm-hmm. Reuniting with him down in Tuscaloosa is going to be a really good piece for that offense. And I love Jalen Milroe. He was an exciting player. He made a lot of fun and exciting plays, especially in the month of September with Alabama. But DeBoer is going to be getting a quarterback under center next year that's more a fit for his scheme and what he's going to be able to do on offense. So that'll be interesting to see as well. The last team that I wanted to touch on kind of in this group too was Miami, because they're the team that I just have no idea how to gauge. They lost a lot of production on offense. I put out a series of articles just talking about all of Notre Dame's opponents and who they lost, who they have coming back, who they acquired in the portal. Miami lost quite a bit. I mean, losing Cam Ward, obviously, but, you lose Xavier Restrepo, you lose Damian Martinez, you lost Isaiah Horton, Elijah Arroyos is gone, and they have to replace their left tackle and their center. And then defensively, they actually have a good amount coming back. They have players coming back at every level on their defense. They have Akeem Messidor coming back, Ruben Baines coming back. OJ Frederick is coming back. So there's going to be some interesting players on their defense. For me, a lot of it surrounds Carson Beck because I don't know. Look, Miami with a lot of those pieces last year with Xavier Restrepo, with Damian Martinez, with Cam Ward, they still went 10-2. So a lot of their season and a lot of their success for me lives with Carson Beck. And I think that's an interesting spot for them to be in. I don't know how you view that, Bill, but for me, Miami's ceiling is I think that they're going to be kind of on the fringe of maybe making a playoff, maybe competing for the ACC title again in the month of November. But then I think their floor is they miss it completely. So I don't know where you fall with them.
You don't say the U is back like everybody else does in September when they win a couple games. This is a Bill Trocchi, who obviously we do the other podcast here at Irish, one of the other podcasts is Irish Breakdown. I always bristle at that notion because I was like, they've never won the ACC. Think about that. They've never won the ACC. They've only played for it, I think, once, maybe twice. Which I remember where I was watching. I was at one of my first newspaper jobs on Labor Day, watching them play Florida State when they made this big deal about Florida State and Miami playing in the ACC for the first time. And never played for an ACC. They've never won an ACC championship, which is insane to me in some ways because it's Miami,
It's crazy.
Carson Beck, I'm trying to find the middle ground with him because on one hand, you saw how good he can be, but then he was throwing to Ladd McConkey and Brock Bowers, who didn't just have good college careers. They were two of the best NFL receivers last year in the league, in the entire league as rookies. So that's a couple dudes. Turned the ball over a little much last year though. Now does he do what Cam Ward does? Maybe, but there's a lot to that program. They, like you said, you lose some guys. They've relied heavily on the transfer portal. That's a little bit of a game of roulette. Mario Cristobal, I still think jury's out because that should have been a playoff team last year. When anytime you have a Heisman finalist quarterback that could be the number one pick, that's a question you have to ask is, okay, why didn't you make the playoff? They lose Georgia Tech. I'll give them that one. Lose to Syracuse in a shootout. Probably should have lost to Cal. Probably slipped, and they slipped by. Probably should have lost to Virginia Tech. The guy caught the Hail Mary. So is this really turning a corner at Miami, or are they just one of the many ACC teams that Notre Dame has mowed down over the years? And I know what an incredible record they have against the ACC in this arrangement. It's pretty high. So, and I'm also interested to see where they'll be ranked. Miami will probably be ranked around where you and I have them.
I'm going to be interested to see how they go. And the one thing that I will say in the defense of Carson Beck, I'm pretty sure Georgia's receiving core led the nation last year in drops.
Yeah, they did. They had a lot of drops.
Yeah, and so you never know how that turns out for them. But the sample size that we did see from Gunnar Stockton this past season and some of the issues that Carson Beck had, you compound that with him coming off of a UCL injury, I think it's still a question mark of how ready he's going to be to go against Notre Dame in August. Most likely, if I were to bet, he would probably play, but I don't know if he's going to be at full go like he would be in October or November. So the Carson Beck conversation is one that I'm going to keep a close eye on as the season progresses because I think they have enough talent. They've done enough in the portal that they could make a run. I did not know Miami's never won the ACC.
Isn't that wild? I point it out every year. I'll say you can tell me the U is back when Miami wins an ACC championship.
Fair enough.
And I'm pretty sure, I'm going to look this up just to be sure while we're here. I'm pretty sure they've only played for an ACC championship one time. And then that was with Mark Richt in that year. And I remember because I went and watched. They've been in the ACC championship game exactly one time. And it was in 2017. And that was a Miami team that I went down and watched them. Notre Dame fans aren't going to want to hear it. I believe I went down and watched them November 11th, 2017. I was at that game. Miami wins 41-8. Destroyed Notre Dame that night down in the Orange Bowl. And again, we're doing the U is back. The U is here. And what happens? 2 weeks later, they lose to Pitt. Then they get destroyed by Clemson. Then they lose their bowl game. So that was the only year where they made the ACC championship game under Mark Richt. And then from there, it's been a lot of spinning wheels. So if any program has a lot to prove in that top 10, it's probably them.
I agree. I'm with you. It's one of those where I will never say that the U is back until they get that big signature win, until they win the ACC. So I'm with you there. Gosh, that is such a crazy stat. I did not know that. You learn something new every day, Bill. The final part of this segment of the show. Do you have any teams in your list or that you're keeping your eye on that could be potential sleeper teams too? And we can separate this into two buckets. I know we're talking about national title contenders, but do you have any sleepers for this upcoming season that have the chance to make the playoffs that not a lot of teams are talking about right now to make the playoffs?
Well, I mean, there's a couple interesting sleepers to me. Illinois would be one. They were that was probably one of the most fun moments of bowl season was the back and forth between Beamer and Bielema. I just happened to be in passing. I don't know what I was doing that day, but I did watch that. I think they're one out of the Big Ten. I think Michigan will strike back on a little bit of a level, though the schedule. I just leave them a little bit of room for breathing because one, I don't know if Bryce Underwood will start right away. They could start Mikey Keene. And if they do start Bryce Underwood right away, I think the offense could undergo something in the neighborhood of what Nebraska did with Raiola last year. There's always bumps with five-star guys. Five-star top quarterback doesn't guarantee immediate success. So I think there are a couple out of the Big Ten that could push their way into that kind of where Indiana was last year and be that third or fourth team in that conference. Whoever wins the Big 12, what dart do you want to throw? Do you want to throw it at BYU, Arizona State? I like BYU, what they have coming back. They were close last year, but I think they're fit to make a couple runs in that conference. So they're another team that didn't win the Big 12, certainly stomped Colorado in the bowl game, though. And, that's one of those teams that I've got my eye on that I think they fit well in that conference. And you mentioned Oklahoma, a little off the radar, but John Mateer was a nice pickup. And I know we're going to talk quarterbacks here in a minute. And maybe that gets that team going a little bit because Jackson Arnold and Michael Hawkins Jr., that just wasn't working. There's some people that love Auburn with Jackson Arnold, who went there, and some of the receivers that Hugh Freeze has. But, Hugh Freeze, obviously, I think I read the other day, dealing with cancer and still going to coach. So, hopefully he has a full recovery. And, but we'll see how that goes. But Auburn's certainly a team in that very large pool of SEC teams that could make it interesting.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I mean, for me, I don't have a ton of sleeper teams. I think that this year it could be a little bit more top heavy. I don't know if an Arizona State emerges like it did this past season. That was such a fun story of 2024. Picked, basically voted on last to finish dead last in their conference, ended up winning the Big 12. Kind of snuck in there towards the end with Kansas State and BYU losing in November. One team that I have my eye on again is Indiana because they bring back a good amount of players from their season last year. I like Cignetti as their head coach. Defensively, they definitely bring back more than what they brought back on offense. But on offense, they had good portal pickups. They got Roman Hemby from Maryland. The Fernando Mendoza pickup from Cal is interesting, but he still has Elijah Surratt and Omar Cooper Jr. to throw to, which are two of their top receivers from last year. They picked up Notre Dame center Pat Coogan, who started 13 games for Notre Dame, picked up Khalil Benson. But on defense, they bring back Mikhail Kamara, which is huge. They bring back Aiden Fisher, D'Angelo Pons, Amari Farrell, their strong safety. So they did lose a lot, but IU, until Cignetti kind of gets his feet under him a little bit and starts building up those recruiting pipelines, I think that they're just going to be a trial by transfer portal type of team. But it worked for him this past season. So they're somebody that I have my eye on too. I don't know if they repeat the 2024 performance because I'm pulling up their schedule right now.
A little bit tougher.
Yeah.
They've got to Google a couple tougher games next year. You got to figure, is this a default ranking where you have them in the top 25, or is it, is this a built to last, not a 1-year wonder thing? And, there's something to that. I do know next year they do play at Penn State, at Oregon. I believe they play Iowa at Iowa early in the season. So Illinois, who's going to be ranked when they play them. Now they're non-con. not good. Old Dominion, Kennesaw State, Indiana State. That's 2 FCS teams. So,
Yeah.
but I do, Kurt Cignetti was the Eddie Robinson Coach of the Year last year. We had a chance to talk to him in Atlanta, we being reporters. It was good. And I think they made that schedule in advance just trying to get to a bowl game. So I don't think the Indiana schedule makers were trying to go, 11-1 in year one with Cignetti, but this guy, he's good.
Yeah.
Good program builder, got a little edge to him. I think there's a lot of substance to what he's doing, but it has to come with the recognition of, yes, their schedule was very easy last year. Michigan, if they had a quarterback of any kind, would have beat them.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think they'll face some bumps, but even at 10-2, 9-3, if they can beat the Wisconsins and Iowas and reassert themselves, because the race to me in the Big Ten isn't about Ohio State and Penn State will probably finish 1 and 2. It's that 3 through 7 that's really interesting. Who's going to be 3 and 4, because they're probably going to beat each other up a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. Indiana's going to have an interesting schedule ahead of them. I will say, I think they're going to benefit from their experiences. Despite having a light schedule, they played Notre Dame at night at Notre Dame Stadium in a home playoff game. And then they played Ohio State in the Horseshoe as well. I'm not saying that that's going to make them bulletproof to traveling to play at Beaver Stadium and then traveling to play at Autzen Stadium against Oregon. But at least it's not going to be something to where it's just an environment that they've never seen before. But we're going to find out pretty quickly what kind of team IU is going to have this season. I don't think they go. I mean, if IU goes 11-1 against that schedule, then they deserve to host a home playoff game.
Right.
I'll say that.
Right. And you could tell. I was at the Ohio State Indiana game this year, and they weren't ready for that stage. I thought they were a little more ready for Notre Dame, but they were just Notre Dame. You get a turnover at the goal line, and then Love takes off on the big run. They were that experience will help the guys that they have come back. Obviously, quarterback with Mendoza a little bit different, but I'm more impressed with they play together on the defensive end, and having Pons and Fisher in particular back. Those were leaders off that defense last year, and I think that'll continue to grow in Bloomington. They're not going to be the pushover that they are normally, where they have one good year and then they were horrible, which is what happened with Tom Allen.
Yep, absolutely. Bill, any more sleeper teams that you have on the docket before we move on to the next topic?
No, I think that pretty much covers it. I mean, we mentioned all the conferences. Out of the group of 5, I think UNLV is going to get a little bit of run with Dan Mullen being there. They worked the portal. They got Alex Orji. They got from Michigan. They got some other guys out of the portal, and I think he'll be trendy. He's a flashy guy. So if you can't, you look at a location for somebody to land, I think he's Dan Mullen at UNLV. The only thing we need to do is get them to play Florida in the first round of the playoffs somehow. That'd be a lot of fun.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The only other group of 5 team that comes to mind for me is Navy. They returned Blake Horvath, Eli Heidenreich. They returned Alex Teska. So they returned their top 3 producers on offense this past year. So there's somebody to keep an eye out on. But until shown or proven otherwise, it's going to be difficult. As much as I would love to see it, a service academy make the playoff, but I think it's going to be interesting. There's somebody to keep an eye on next season for sure.
Oh, absolutely. I think, yeah. And Horvath being a local Central Ohio kid, you always pull for him a little bit. I know he's from nearby Hilliard. So they are a team definitely that when we were sorting out, okay, which group of 5 team do we like off the go? I mean, Boise State will still be good. But Navy's a good pull there, especially with the setup that they have.
Well, all right, guys, that's going to do it for the second part of today's show. Don't go anywhere because we still have the final topic to talk about. We're going to break down the top quarterbacks returning in 2025. But before we get there, guys, please be sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, share this podcast, whichever platform that you watch this on. Please be sure to leave us a 5-star review. We'd greatly appreciate it, whether that's on Spotify Podcasts or Apple Podcasts. We're going to have some time at the end of today's show. Bill's going to have to get out of here a little bit after 3, but if you guys do have any mailbag questions, I'll stick around and answer some of those if you guys have any coming in. I know some spring news broke today for Notre Dame. Spring practice is right around the corner. So I'll do my best to answer any questions that you guys have. If not, we'll keep them shared for when Brian returns next week. But if there are enough questions, we will get to some mailbag questions after Bill heads out of here shortly after 3. And as always, subscribe to the premium message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. All right, Mr. Bender. The last thing that we are going to talk about today is the best returning quarterbacks, the top returning quarterbacks for 2025. And we're going to kind of sort this out into 3 separate verticals, if you will. We're going to talk about, the best returning starters, and then we're going to talk about transfers. And then finally, we're going to wrap that up with first-time starters. And I would throw Arch Manning into that pool because he started last year, but it wasn't in games of substance, I would say. So starting out, who are some of your top returning quarterbacks, returning starters in 2025? Oh, you're muted, Bill.
Good for one of those a show. It happens once a show. That's a long-running joke with me and Brian. But Cade Klubnik, I mentioned him earlier. There's a guy that a lot of experience. This best returning quarterbacks, there's not a lot of like sexy names, but I think Cade Klubnik's one. And I always look at, can he throw the ball down the field? 16 touchdowns, 3 interceptions on passes of 20 yards or more, according to Pro Football Focus, says he can. Did not play well against South Carolina and Georgia, though. So that's always the holdback there. Like, if he's so good, why didn't he play well against South Carolina? So he's one that we have. Garrett Nussmeier is another one. But again, is that by, he played, so he must be good if he's back and threw for 4,000 yards? Well, maybe. And I think those are 2 that stick out. And then you get into Lenoris Sellers. So who is Lenoris Sellers? He's a guy that's being compared to Cam Newton, at South Carolina. There is some really good things about his game. And it's his second full year as a starter. Is he going to be one of those guys? And then you get into guys that it's like, am I totally sure? I mean, even Drew Aller. I mean, are we sure? Sam Levitt, great year last year. Can he do it again? Rocco Beck, Carson Beck. Those are the guys. So I think, but it really starts with Klubnik with me. And maybe I'm off on that assessment, but I'm pulling up the Heisman odds now to see who are the guys. Well, Drew Aller's up there. Nico Iamaleava, Lenoris Sellers. I mean, I don't know. I would throw Cade Klubnik in that mix. And I think he's right there at number 3 for the Heisman odds right now.
He's definitely one of those quarterbacks up there for me. I love the Cade Klubnik pick. I think he's gotten a lot of scrutiny, and I think it's tough because he's coming in and he's stepping into a role that's had some really heavy hitters at quarterback before in the past. So Cade Klubnik's a good pull. Yeah, there's some other quarterbacks that are kind of fringe for me. Kevin Jennings from SMU, I'm interested to see what he does. Luke Altmaier returns at Illinois. I'm going to be interested to see what he does. But overall, this has kind of been an interesting year for quarterback play because there's not that big returning starter name. Drew Aller, maybe, but the whole thing with Penn State is you got to see him do it. And I'm with that completely. I do think that Drew Aller is a little bit overhated. Not saying that you were saying that, but right. I think just nationally, I think he gets a little bit more scrutiny than what he deserves.
He's a good player. Mm-hmm. I just don't know that I see first round NFL player. And that's what they were building that up after the Boise State game. I was like, not yet. Got to show more accuracy, those kind of things. DJ Lagway is another name we got to throw in there. He didn't start the full season, but I saw on 3 Ari Wasserman had him as his, way too early All-American team, for example. But he could be a preseason All-American. Like, we always have that debate. I'm wondering who if I was making our preseason All-American team, probably Klubnik as of now, but that can evolve. So, I mean, that's that short list of top returners, but I think you're onto something with Drew Aller. He is scrutinized, but at the same time, when you're 6'4" or 6'3", whatever he is, huge, you fit all the NFL prototypes.
Yeah. And
then you go out and you play horrible against ranked teams. He has not played well against Ohio State. He has not played well against Michigan. He did not play well. And then he makes that fatal mistake I don't think he played well against Notre Dame.
No, I'm with you. Look, Penn State's receivers ended that game with 0 receptions and 0 yards. Now, do I think a lot of that had to do with Notre Dame's excellent cornerback play? I do. Some of the throws were very off target. He had an inaccurate game. And there's a conversation that can be had around, well, was Notre Dame's defense forcing those? To a degree, sure. But an entire game where a receiver doesn't have a catch, it's kind of a tough line in the semifinals of the college football playoff.
Right.
A lot of the returning starters in 2025 are all fringe for me and being like the best, because they all kind of fit the same bill of like, are they going to take that next step? I think of Avery Johnson at Kansas State. I think of Lenoris Sellers at South Carolina. I think of Marcel Reed at Texas A&M. They're all returning starters. They're going back to the same teams, but I don't know if I would label them and put them on the same level as a Cade Klubnik, because you got to see him do it. Mm-hmm. So I'm with you. The returning conversation, I think, is a lot more interesting this season than it was last year. So,
mm-hmm. and I agree with that. And then, like, it's just not, and I also do, as you know, some NFL work for us at Sporting News, where I can separate a college quarterback from what they're going to be in the NFL. But I know that when we make our list we make an annual list around draft time of, okay, here will be the 10 quarterbacks to watch for the draft next year. I don't love any of these names right now, just like I don't really love any of the names in this year's draft, other than maybe Cam Ward and maybe Shedeur Sanders.
Yeah.
When we're talking about Kyle McCord being the third quarterback drafted this year, that's an overall thing. And I know Brian always has thoughts on this. I would love to hear his actually on why. My view is that the quarterback play has gotten worse. I was looking for a cute word to say. It's gotten worse. Like, as you get to the NFL now, some of these guys break through like Jaden Daniels did, Caleb Williams, but in terms of like college quarterback to NFL matching, it's not great.
I think it is weird. It's a weird trend. My take on it is I think that the transfer portal is playing a little bit of a factor in that, because I think it's stunting the development of some.
That could be.
It's tough when you're a 19, 20-year-old kid and you're going on your third offensive coordinator at your second school, or potentially your third school. Who knows? And I know the transfer portal was prevalent before now, especially with quarterbacks. But you go back through and you think, and you have guys like Joe Burrow. His breakout season at LSU, I believe, was his 5th year in college. You had guys like Baker Mayfield. He transferred to Oklahoma, but he played at Texas Tech previous. You have guys now who are freshmen or redshirt freshmen that have yet to really play, maybe don't really want to get their feet too much into a true quarterback competition, so they go to where the open job spots are. So I think that could be a part of it. I don't think that it's any mystery that one of the better quarterbacks in this draft is Cam Ward. He had a lot of college experience before he transferred to Miami and had the season that he did. And so that could be a part of it. I'm not too sure. But I'm also interested to get Brian's perspective on that. That's something that I'll be sure to ask him.
Like I said, like I seen Andrew Gilmore in the comments. Well, yeah, Daniels and Stroud are good. Who else? Like Caleb Williams is okay. He's got a lot to prove to me. New coach, we'll see. Took a ton of sacks, but you go past one or two guys, the depth is not there. And I know I'm not saying you got to be an NFL franchise quarterback out of the college game, but I can say that Drake May is okay, but long way to go, right? Like, you look at, we've talked in recent seasons, we've talked ourselves into Will Levis as a first rounder. That wasn't going to happen. Anthony Richardson had a good combine. We drafted him off that little of experience at one team. And then we're wondering, okay, you can't blame the organization at that point. So I don't know. I just think the level of play at that position, you'll have one or two guys maybe, but the depth this year's draft, not great. Not when you're talking yourself into Kyle McCord or Will Howard, who's probably a day 2 guy. And I think we do push day 2 guys up to day 1. And next year it's going to be the same case, unless there's some guys that will ball out, no doubt. But if you're planning on, nobody's going to be tanking their draft to draft Garrett Nussmeier or Cade Klubnik or, DJ. I think DJ is a sophomore, so you got another year there. But you get what I'm saying.
No, I'm with you. And then even quarterbacks like C.J. Stroud, he digressed from year 1 to year 2. Now the Texans suffered injuries. I know it's not as simple as saying, well, he just got worse. The team around him also didn't do him any favors. But yeah, you're absolutely right. You go through and you look, it wasn't that long ago where Kenny Pickett was a first-round NFL quarterback.
Right. And it now there are the Burrows and the Josh,
Sure.
I mean, we picked apart Josh Allen though when
Oh
he was
yeah.
coming up. We picked Jalen Hurts. I know we picked him apart. People were trying to turn him into a receiver.
Oh
So
yeah.
it's not a perfect science. I understand that. I just think there's a little bit the portal, the just the college game with the reads and the passing game are different when the windows are smaller in the NFL.
Yeah.
And you want that guy that can pitch. I always emphasize that statistic. I'm looking at the guy who can throw from 11 to 20 yards. Everybody can throw the ball far,
Sure.
and everybody can throw a bubble screen. Who can throw between 11 and 20 yards? That's what I've said that for a couple years now, and that's where you'll find the real NFL quarterbacks. I mean, I'm a Green Bay fan, and I pick at Jordan Love because he has bad interceptions sometimes. There are moments of just unbelievable greatness, and there's moments of unreal inconsistency, and that's the quarterback position. So, and it's a good segue into the transfer part of this discussion where I mentioned Mateer earlier. I think he could figure it out at Oklahoma and have a big year. We talked a lot about Carson Beck. What about Miller Moss?
He would. Mm-hmm.
I like that one. I like that Braum has had two quarterbacks the last 2 years transfers. Tyler Shuck, who we're trying to talk ourselves into this year. There's another guy. And Plummer 2 years ago. Those guys, I looked this up, averaged 3,200 yards, 22 touchdowns, 9 interceptions the last 2 years for Louisville. I think that's about what Miller Moss will get them, even maybe more. I know he struggled at the back half of last year.
Miller Moss is one of the more interesting conversations for me going into this season because I would feel a lot better about him because Jeff Brom is a genius offensive mind, and I love how he runs Louisville's offense. The one concern, and I would not have this concern if he came from any other school that didn't have Lincoln Riley at it, because if there's one thing that I have a lot of confidence in with Lincoln Riley is it's developing quarterbacks. His track record, I think, kind of earns him that right. And Miller Moss was the one kid where it's just like, okay, don't really see it. Ended up getting benched for Jade Maeva. Turnovers were an issue for Miller Moss. I'm going to be interested to see how he turns that around with Jeff Brom and the Louisville staff and what they have coming back on their offense. But I think he could be an impactful transfer. Trying to think of who else has transferred across, because a lot of the most interesting part of this conversation is going to kind of be the third group that we talk about. It's like the new starters or who's penciled in to be a new starter. But I'm going through and I'm thinking, Carson Beck will be up there for Miami. He transferred in. It's going to be interesting to see. We've already talked about him.
Yep. I mean, those are the big ones, though. I mean, Mateer as well. Mendoza at Indiana. Mikey Keene at Michigan. That's another guy that I think he could start early, maybe. But I think you run into that problem when you have a guy like Bryce Underwood and the amount of money that they've thrown into him NIL-wise. Your leash as Mikey Keene is so small. And but I did like his game at Fresno State. I thought he was a nice quarterback. So, I mean, those are kind of the major ones that we've seen. Mateer, interesting. I want to see if they incorporate his offensive skill set into what they are doing at Oklahoma. And if that, and in turn, if that works. So I think those are the big names for me of guys that could definitely do that. And, you know, I didn't see too many others that when they got in the portal, I was like, oh yeah, that's going to make a huge difference.
There is another one that I forgot about, and it's Dylan Lonergan at Boston College.
Okay.
He's going to be an interesting one because Bill O'Brien had got a quarterback that has the ability to drop back and pass the ball a little bit. And I'm going to be interested to see what that looks like. Thomas Castellanos wasn't really a fit for that offense, in my opinion, for Boston College. And so I'm going to be interested to see what it looks like now with Lonergan, if he's able to win the starting position, because there's going to be a quarterback battle going on there. But it's an area of interest, especially because Notre Dame travels to Chestnut Hill to play them this year for the first time, I think, since like 2020.
He's the baseball guy, right? He was the baseball guy. Yeah. So, like, you're always fascinated with guys with that kind of arm. I know he never really got his chance at Alabama. But he could be very interesting.
Yep. I know. Let's see who. Connor Wegman left A&M to go to Houston. Jackson Arnold's at Auburn. Bo Prabula, the Penn State backup, is now at Missouri battling it out with Drew Pine. So
that sounds like an exciting quarterback battle. Aren't you jealous you're not covering that one?
Yeah. Yeah, I know. Oh, man, that's funny. That's funny. The last group that we're going to talk. Well, I'm sorry. Before we get there, Bill, any other transfers that you can think of that'll be impactful for this upcoming season?
No, let's talk about Arch Manning instead.
Yeah.
That sounds more fun to me. Arch
Love
and
it.
this group of first-year guys, but I think we got the transfers covered.
Yep. So the transfers are going to kind of be the highlight of what this conversation is, because like we talked about at the start of the show, Bill, a lot of these schools that dipped into the portal to get veteran guys are now relying on homegrown kids for this upcoming year. So how do you see the new first-time starters? Who do you think is going to start the headline? Who are going to be some of the top new starters this season?
Well, Arch, I mean, we can't go 5 seconds without talking about him. He did more traffic at our website for somebody that barely played. Didn't barely play, played enough. But, I mean, just the high-level fascination, the Manning ties, the opener against Ohio State, the, beautiful deep ball, the mobility. Can he live up to the expectation? He is the Heisman favorite, which is wild. I mean, college football hasn't had a superstar, like I don't think they've had a superstar that's crossed the mainstream quite like him, probably since like Tebow, Manziel, those two. Those were the two largest superstars I can like that were so far, and he was kind of doing that last year. We were talking about him more last year. I'll go back and like reevaluate that. I mean, but I'm just going off the lens of like Bryce Young wasn't that. Trevor Lawrence was big deal, but he wasn't this in terms of like celebrity and the last name. If his name was Arch Johnson, probably be different.
Sure.
But he's Arch Manning and he has that bloodline and they have a mega opener. And I think he could make, if they win that game at Ohio Stadium, good luck controlling the hype around him the rest of the year. So I think that's one. And then the guy opposite him, Julian Sayin, if he grabs hold of this Ohio State job, he's got an arm. You could see the arm talent and the 5-star that, do they get back to having a first-round quarterback on top of what they already have? Thrown to Jeremiah Smith. So I think those two right off the bat are probably the two most fascinating. And then keeping it local, obviously, CJ, if he wins the Notre Dame job, and Bryce Underwood, I've mentioned him about 4 times on this show. Does he get that Michigan offense, which was pathetic last year, going? And he's a big kid and going to draw comparisons because that's what we always do. But those are the 4 in particular, the newcomers that I'm kind of like, yep, I want to see it because, the 5-star label isn't perfect, but when you find a good one and having it at the programs that you have them, I mean, it's going to be a lot of fun to sort out.
No, absolutely. I think all those are spot on. I would put Dante Moore into that conversation at Oregon. He started a little bit at UCLA, but obviously it's going to be more of a headlining job taking over at Oregon. He has a very live arm. His arm, I mean, Notre Dame recruited him for a while, and he was, I believe, committed to Notre Dame for quite some time, a little bit before he flipped his commitment. And so, yeah, Dante Moore is one of those kids that I think that he could make a big impact for that Oregon offense. I am going to be interested to see what Dan Lanning's able to do with a quarterback that isn't like a 5th-year senior. Bo Nix was very experienced at the college level. Dylan Gabriel was very experienced at the college level. So now he's taking over somebody who I believe is going to be a redshirt sophomore. It's going to be interesting to see what he asks of him because he asked a lot of Bo Nix and Dylan Gabriel in that offense. But he's somebody for me that I'm keeping my eye on. Honestly, whoever wins the quarterback job in South Bend, I'm going to be keeping my eye on, whether it's CJ, Steve, or Kenny. Kenny is one of those kids that Brian coined this a couple of shows ago. But he kind of has that middle child syndrome a little bit. Everybody talks about the oldest, which is Steve Angeli, and then CJ Carr, who's kind of the baby of the family. But Kenny Minchie is somebody that has a lot of potential at Notre Dame, and he's very much in the mix. But I think it's just, Steve has been the guy that's been there for so long. CJ's the legacy, or not the legacy, but he has the name, the football name, grandson of Lloyd Carr. So I'm going to be interested to see how that all shakes out. Julian Sayin, absolutely. Whoever starts at quarterback for Alabama, if Alabama is going to return to being a playoff contender, who's the kid that's there right now? Is it Ty Simpson? that's going to be in
Ty
contention?
Simpson's the name that he's been around a while. He had a 5-star background too. You mentioned Minchie. When I was at the title game, and I wasn't at the practices, but I was seeing a lot of tweets about him and spinning the ball in practice. So only so much you can take from a 10-minute interview window, but
Sure.
at least as reporters, we know how to look at somebody and say that looks pretty good coming off his hand. Right.
Yeah.
And I think that I was seeing a little bit about that with him. I do know that, when we were sitting at the Texas-Michigan game last year, Pat Forty and I were literally watching Arch warm up. So yes, we are capable of watching quarterbacks warm up and say they can competently throw a football down the football field. I don't know what that's worth or why you would read me more after that. But yeah, I agree with that with Notre Dame. It's very compelling because there's more than one name. Michigan's is compelling because how soon is now for Underwood. Ohio State, if it's not Julian saying, I don't know who it's going to be. Like Aaron Nolan's gone. He went to South Carolina. Will Howard's going.
The other guy's Tavian St. Clair.
Oh, yeah, he's an exciting freshman. So, they like him, Bellefountain kid up here in Ohio. So there's another one. Is it him? Devin Brown transferred, I believe. So
yeah, Devin Brown's at
Cal. So he went there and he'll get his chance to play. But it is very interesting. Those will be really interesting battles all the way through. But those are the guys. I just think every sentence begins and ends with Arch until, like I always ask, these questions, what if he's bad? And we did mention Sam Levitt, Andrew. I think we did. We probably didn't mention enough. He was impressive.
He was.
Running the ball, more mobility than I thought he had. And then you saw that towards the end of the season. He was really good. Michigan State probably wishes they still had him. Well, they have Aiden Childs. He's pretty good too.
Yep. Aiden Childs was somebody that we did forget to mention, but it's so tough. Michigan State's kind of in the process of making its way back into the limelight. But no, I'm with you. It's going to be interesting to see how they go. I mean, I'm going to be interested to see how much Deuce Knight gives Jackson Arnold a push down at Auburn. He's a highly touted recruit, somebody that Notre Dame fans are very familiar with. So there's a couple across the country. I've read some things. I don't know how much validity there is to them, but I have heard some things that Gunnar Stockton isn't a complete lock at quarterback down at Georgia. Right. I would be shocked if that wasn't the case, but they are having some sort of a competition down there to see who starts. The name of the other kid is escaping me.
Yeah, they have I think Rashada transferred. So they have a Puglisi and Colin Drake won't be part of that. But yeah, that's a redshirt freshman. And Georgia, when they have quarterback, you know what? I can't believe I'm going to say this on the show, but like Stetson Bennett spoiled them a little bit. The fact that they had a reliable option that just won football games and did things the right way. And I've seen Georgia when they've had guys, when they did Eason for a while and, they weren't sure it was Jake Fromm. I mean, maybe that's the guy that they need, but they've had better than average quarterback play out of these guys, even if they've had competitions in the past.
Yeah, no, absolutely. As much as people don't like it, I mean, Stetson Bennett, one, on top of winning back-to-back national championships for the Dogs. I mean, he was an athletic game manager. I mean, surrounded by fantastic talent during his tenure down at Georgia. But he was exciting enough that he wasn't like a Tommy Rees type of game manager. I mean, Stetson Bennett still had a pretty decent arm. He was very mobile, more mobile than what I thought that he was, if I'm being completely honest. And the story was fun because he started as a walk-on and was like 5th on the depth chart when he entered his time at Georgia. So, no, I'm with you. I do
For
think
those asking, Jaden Rashada is in the portal training and waiting for the spring window. That's the saga of Jaden Rashada continues to get more bizarre. But as the kids say, that will be a 30 for 30 someday. It will be a pretty short one, but it might be a 30 for 30 at some point.
Yeah, no, I remember hearing that. Yeah, Jaden Rashada, he's sitting out now training. He's not even in school, I don't think.
That's crazy.
Hopefully it's unfortunately some of the era that we're in now, Bill.
Right.
No. Well, go ahead. Sorry.
No, just saying, yeah, like, you know, I know we got to roll out of here in a few minutes here, but no, I think all of the things we covered today, some things will change in the spring. The sport's doing really well. Um, you know, there was some talk in the ACC, touch on this really quickly, that the fact that the ACC got their league buttoned up, it's a short-term solution. We'll have some short-term stability in the sport. You know, the playoff will change a little bit, but I think we're going to go to 14 or 16 soon. We're going to still have these conferences. That Super League talk that I personally love is probably going to shut down for a little bit. And I think the ACC, at least for the life of this grant of rights deal, looking like it's in pretty good shape.
Yeah. The ACC deal is going to be interesting. I'm glad that they are getting some sort of short-term stability here in this, what is now the crazy world of this 12-team expanded playoff, super conferences, and all that stuff. And so I'm going to be interested to see how that works out for them moving forward. Well, Bill, thank you for stopping in today.
Yeah, it was good. You know, you're less argumentative than Brian, but I love Brian. I love being on the show. I love what you guys do for me and Bill at our show, which we're not having one this week. I know Bill's pretty bogged down with March Madness planning, but if you check us out at Sporting News, it'd be great. And you know, hopefully one of these times you, me, and Brian do a 3-man booth. It'd be a lot of fun.
Yes, that will definitely be on the docket for this upcoming season. That's for sure.
All right.
Well, Bill, we'll let you get back to your day. Thanks for stopping in here, man.
Hey, no problem, Trevor. Take it easy.
Yep, you too. All right, folks. Well, that was Bill Bender from Sporting News. Thank you guys for being with us for that segment of today's show. There are some mailbag questions in here that we're going to get to in just a second, but you guys know how it goes. Be sure to hit the like button, that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, share this podcast with your friends and family, anybody that you know loves Notre Dame and college football as much as you do. And as always, the best way to support what we do here is subscribe to the premium message boards. A lot of the conversations that Bill and I had today, a lot of the conversations that you guys are having in the chat are currently going on over in the Champions Lounge at boards.irishbreakdown.com. All right, folks, we have some mailbag questions to get to. And if this is your first mailbag, which I would find it hard to believe that it is, but if it is your first mailbag, super chats get bumped to the top. But we have some questions in here. As always, Old Faithful Salty Virginia Peanuts blessed us with a mail bombing in here. I am going to apologize in advance if I don't have all of the answers for you in this one. Brian is, as you guys know, the all-knowledgeable one here at Irish Breakdown. So any of the questions that he has or that you guys have that I'm not able to answer, we'll be sure to kick those over to Brian. And then Sean Davis and I will be back here tomorrow at 1 p.m. for the Friday free-for-all mailbag. And he also might have a little bit better insight to some of these. But we're going to get started here. Mad14ND has a question. He says, has anyone inside the program said who are the leading contenders for the starting quarterback position? So not to my knowledge, this is still very much an open competition. They have yet to take the field in spring practice. I do know that spring is starting here within the next 2 weeks, which is really exciting. Can't believe we are already to that point, because it feels like the national championship game was a couple days ago. And we're already rounding the corner into spring, and then before you know it, we're going to be talking about fall camp. We did just get the spring schedule yesterday, so we're kind of sorting everything out, but there will obviously be content coming out for all of those. But as of right now, no. I don't think that the staff would even be able to name anybody who are leading. I mean, as of right now, the leading contenders are, and this is a cop-out answer, Steve Angeli, Kenny Minchie, and CJ Carr. And a lot is going to start to get sorted out in the spring. So it's going to be interesting to see how that goes. But as of right now, Mad One, to my knowledge, nobody inside of the program said who the leading contenders are as of today for that job. Our guy Salty, his first question in here, how much eligibility does Pine have left? So I read the other day on Twitter that I'm pretty sure he has 2 years of eligibility left. So Drew Pine, I believe, can play in the 2026 season as well. I'm going to have to double check that. But I believe he has multiple years. Let me see, because I know he was at Notre Dame for a while, left after the 22 season. Let me see. Yeah, he started playing in 22. He was at Arizona State in 23, Missouri this past season. So, yeah, I believe that he has 2 years of eligibility left in college, which is crazy to think about, but he's well on his way to being the Salty beat me to it. He's well on his way to being the new Cam Rising of college football. I did read also that Cam Rising, I don't think, is no longer with Utah, but I also didn't see his name in the draft. I don't know where he is right now. Let me try to find where Cam Rising is. Cam Rising, he's no longer on the Utah football roster, but I don't think that he's declared for the draft at all. I don't know how much more eligibility he has left, if at all. I'd be surprised if it was any. But yes, Drew Pine has been in college football for quite some time, and I believe he still has 2 years of eligibility left, which is really wild to think about. The next question in here from Salty: which players' injuries will hinder his development in the spring the most and the least? So I don't know if you guys saw it, but I put a piece on the board. Notre Dame today, they had their press conference, and I'll also have a piece coming out about this. They had a press conference today where they introduced Mike Martin, the new GM. So I'll have a piece coming out about that shortly after the show's over. But Notre Dame today, they released basically a list of players who were injured going into the spring, and they separated the list into 2 separate lists. One that was labeled modified activity, which to me is just limited participation. And then they've already ruled out some of the other players who will be out for the spring. And so the players who are kind of on a pitch count is kind of how I'm reading it. Anthony Knapp will be nursing a right ankle. Cole Mullins, the defensive lineman, he's out, or he'll be limited with a left knee. Will Pauling, he is experiencing some issues on his right foot, and I think it's some of the lingering issues that he had from this past season, which kept him out of some games. Will Pauling only played in 10 games this past season for Wisconsin. I think that he's just more on a pitch count to make sure that he's going to be healthy and fully good to go once the summer and the fall camps hit. Billy Schrouth, you guys know that his left ankle has been banged up for quite some time. He is limited activity in the spring as well. And then Robbie Wolin, he is limited as well in the spring with a right knee. Some of these injuries, and I said this on the board, that it was, the list is lengthy, but a lot of these players were injured last year. So some of them weren't really anything new. Jordan Botello, he is still out nursing his right knee injury, but I believe his name is Rob Hunt, the leading trainer, said that he is well on his way to being back to full football activities come spring and the fall. So that's going to be really exciting. Ashton Craig is still out nursing his left knee injury. Davian Dixon, the incoming freshman, he is out for the spring. He's nursing a right pec injury. Cooper Flanagan injured his left Achilles towards the end of the postseason last year. He is out for the spring. Keanu Kia, he tore his ACL, I believe it was last fall, I believe, because he had a pretty good spring game, and he is out nursing a left knee injury. Chris Tarrick, he hurt his right foot and his left shoulder. He hurt his AC joint in his left shoulder, so he's out for the spring. Then obviously Boubacar Traore, he's still out with a left knee injury. Chance Tucker is still out with his right knee injury. Jalen Stroman is also out for the spring with a right clavicle injury, so he is still working his way back from his injury that he sustained that ended his season against Vanderbilt. So that's the list in whole. Salty, to answer your question, which player's injury will hinder his development the most? If I would have to say the most, gosh, I know Chris Tarrick, the offensive line being put together is one of those where he was in the mix of potentially battling it out for one of the guard spots. That one's tough for him. I would have loved to see what Jalen Stroman could have done in the spring, being one of the leaders in that room. Now, he can still be a leader off the field, but that's going to now open the door for Luke Talich to get exclusive reps, Jadon Blair to get exclusive reps, Bronte Johnson, Kennedy Urlacher. So there's a lot of players that'll be in the mix there. Some of them we knew, Jordan Botello and Boubacar Traore. I don't think a lot of people expected them to be back for the spring. So hindering the development, I would say, depending on what Anthony Knapp's modified activity looks like, that could be one of them, because he's going to be in the mix to be starting somewhere along the offensive line. And typically that freshman to sophomore year jump is one where you see a lot of development. So I'm going to be interested to see how that plays out for him. But if I could wrap it all in a bow for you, I would say one of Anthony Knapp, Ashton Craig. Yeah, I would go with one of those two. I love Ashton Craig at center. He is one of those players for me that a lot of people are kind of slating him in to just be the starting center at Notre Dame, when in reality he has yet to play a full season. Obviously, in 2023, he came in and he replaced Zeke Correll after I think Zeke Correll had a concussion against Clemson. They made the move to just start Ashton Craig the rest of the season. He opened this season as a starter, and he only made it into about 2.5 games. And so it's going to be interesting to see what that does for him. So Ashton Craig, I would have loved to see in the spring as well, but he's still nursing back his injury. The player that I think it'll affect the least from a limited snap count point, I would say Will Pauling. He's a proven player, and he had a good career in the Big Ten. Him being on a pitch count, I'm not too worried about his production. He's still going to be able to learn a lot being around Mike Denbrock, the quarterbacks, the rest of the wide receiver room, Jaden Greathouse in that room. And then on defense, I would say the person that I'd be least concerned about is, for development-wise, would be somebody like Jalen Stroman, for the same reasons as Will Pauling. He's still going to get to be around the defense. He's still learning from Mike Mickens. He'll still be in the same position room as Adon Schuler and Luke Talich and Jadon Blair and Bronte Johnson. And so that's kind of where I'm at with that one, Salty. It's a good question, though. In a non-football related question, Salty Virginia Penis asked, will you attend the Zach Bryan and Shane Gillis, I hear, show at South Bend? I want to. I know that's at the end of August, I believe, or middle of August. Let me see here. Yeah, he will be in South Bend with Zach Bryan on September 6th. Okay. So it's actually during, I think that's during Notre Dame's bye week, because that's in between the Miami and Texas A&M game. Any excuse that I can have to be up on that campus, I will be. I also love Shane Gillis. I love that Notre Dame kind of has their celebrity mascot now, like some other teams do. I don't know if he's going to reach Matthew McConaughey status and what he has going on down in Texas. But yeah, I love Shane Gillis. I would love to go up. So might have to add it to the list. I know Lauren would love to go to something like that as well. So it's also going to depend on the price of tickets. So we will see how that goes. His next question, Chad Bowden seems to have made a recent reference that Lincoln Riley is the best recruiter he has seen. Is there bad blood between Chad and Marcus? Look, I can't speak to that because I don't know. Brian had a much better relationship with Chad than what I had. I'll say this. I do believe that there might be some bad blood between others in the program. I know Brian has referenced that in shows before. I don't think it's anything between them personally, but it was definitely a shot. Look, we've talked before in previous comments that Chad has made, and when you look at it with a little bit of context, I also believe that when you look at some of his comments with context, I don't think that they were shots at Notre Dame. Calling out directly the head coach and he's the best recruiter that he has seen, I do believe that to be a shot. And so I think it's more a reflection on other people in the program, but believe me, I don't think that's going to be lost on Marcus Freeman when USC travels to South Bend in October. Sean Davis and I actually had a question about that in the buy, sell, hold. And I think it was like buy, sell, hold, Marcus Freeman and Chad Bowden will shake hands at the end of the USC game. If you watched what went down at the end of the Penn State game and how Marcus Freeman handled the handshake at midfield with James Franklin, I can't imagine there being much conversation between Chad and Marcus on that day. But Salty, to answer your question, I don't think there's bad blood between them specifically. I could be wrong. I don't think that I am. I think it's just more with other personnel that are a part of the athletic department in the program outside of Marcus Freeman. Saw that Mad One for ND put in another question in here. He asked, if Onye is playing this year, how impactful will he be to the Notre Dame defensive line? I think he'll be extremely impactful on the defensive line. I mean, look, at one point last year, Jason Onye was one of the more productive players on the defensive line. At one point, if you guys remember last season, people were talking about how Jason Onye was outperforming Riley Mills and Howard Cross, and we're calling for him to be one of the starters. For him this spring, it's going to be working back in the rotation, getting back into the process of being with the team. And from what it sounds like, everything's going swimmingly. And I'm excited. I'm going up for a couple of spring practices this year, so it'll be nice to see big old number 47 running around with the guys again. But he'll be extremely impactful because he brings a lot of experience. I think he's one of the more athletically gifted defensive tackles in the room. And he's just a really good complement to the other players in that room. He provides a lot of size. He's 6'5". He's 291 pounds. So I really believe that he could be an impact player on this D line. Pairing him with Rubio, Jared Dawson's a big body, Elijah Hughes is a big body. Donovan Heinisch has a lot of experience. And then if you can start really developing your guys like an Armel Mukum, a Sean Sevillano, guys like that who also have a bigger frame, Notre Dame should be beefing up their interior defensive line. But to answer your question, he would be very, very impactful. It's definitely going to be more of a rotation. If you go back through and you look at the snaps played by interior defensive linemen last season, Howard Cross and Riley Mills, I believe, were both over 500. And that is something that I don't think any of their defensive tackles are going to come close to this year, because I think it will be more of a rotating type of deal. Let me look here. I thought I had it written down. Yeah, Riley Mills played 539 snaps last year and missed 3 games. Howard Cross played 585 snaps and missed 3.5 games and was banged up through the postseason. So he probably wasn't even carrying as much workload as he did in the middle part of the season. So I don't see any 2 defensive tackles sniffing close to 600 like what Howard Cross did. But I do believe that the production will be distributed amongst a lot of the players that they have back, Onye included. Another question in here from Salty Virginia Peanuts. How impactful will Devontae Smith be for Notre Dame? So I think impactful. Look, Devontae Smith is now the 3rd nickel corner in a row that they've brought into South Bend. And you go through and you look at the previous production from former slot corners at Notre Dame. Thomas Harper came in from Oklahoma State. He had a productive season in a different way than what Jordan Clark did in 2024. Excuse me. So Thomas Harper, he made plays more in the backfield around the line of scrimmage. Al Golden blitzed him a little bit more than what they did Jordan Clark. Whereas Jordan Clark this past season was excellent in coverage. He was a really good open field tackler. Didn't allow a whole lot of passing yards. I believe after watching his film and after seeing what he did at Alabama, Devontae Smith brings aspects of both. He brings a little bit bigger of a frame than what Jordan Clark had, similar to what Thomas Harper had. But I don't think that that's going to sacrifice anything from a coverage standpoint for him. At Alabama, he was targeted 29 times. He only gave up 19 receptions, but his yardage was really short. He only gave up 123 receiving yards across 12 games. He started 11 of the 12 games for Alabama this past season. And a lot of that was just due to defensive scheme. Alabama ran a lot more zone than what they have, especially in comparison to what Notre Dame did this past season. A lot of it was quick now screens, bubble screens out to him. And so whenever a tight end or a slot receiver did make a catch in front of Devontae Smith, they went down almost immediately. And every single game this past season for Alabama, Devontae Smith didn't allow more than 30 yards receiving in any given game and has yet to allow a touchdown in his time with Alabama. That's all promising things coming into South Bend. Now, he's going to have to do a lot to replicate that performance, and he's coming into a room that has a lot of young talent that could fight for those positions. Carson Hobbs has been taking reps at nickel. Then you have the 3 youngsters. Cree Thomas is already there as an early enrollee. Dallas Golden and Mark Zachary are both coming in after the spring. They could all have the potential to play nickel. Bronte Johnson could slide down and play the nickel. Depending on how Kennedy Urlacher develops in coverage, he might be somebody that the team looks at nickel. But Devontae Smith gives you a lot of good leverage at that position specifically. Played in a lot of big moments. A lot of big moments for Alabama. He played against, this past season alone, he played against Tennessee. He played at Oklahoma. He played at LSU. He played against Georgia. He played at Wisconsin. So there's a lot of experience coming to the table for him. So his impact is going to be felt throughout the team. I'm very, very confident in that. Next question in here was, what will be the difference in responsibility between Carter Allman's new position, the director of recruiting, and the director of player personnel? I'm going to be honest with you, Salty. Brian's going to be able to give you a more in-depth answer with that, just because I don't know what specifically are going to be the job duties of a Mike Martin and then the director of recruiting. I think the director of player personnel is going to file more under Mike Martin. Roster maintenance, handling current players on the roster, dipping into the portal, things like that. But the director of recruiting, I think, is going to be more high school focused and more focused on the high school pipeline. So that for me is going to be the extent of my answer for that one, Salty. I'm sorry I couldn't give you more of an in-depth answer. Ask that question again tomorrow when Sean Davis is on with me, because he'll be able to answer that a lot better than what I will be. But I definitely wanted to bring it up. Next question in here is, when all is said and done, will Drake Bowen, Jaden Osbury, or the King be considered the best linebacker of the three? I guess when you say when all is said and done, I'm assuming you're talking about the end of all of their careers, because I believe that Drake Bowen will be gone a little bit sooner than what a Jaden Osbury or a Kingston might be. Out of all of them, I don't know. This upcoming season, it's tough to tell because, yeah, I've said this before, but I do believe that they're going to rotate significantly more this upcoming season than what they did in years past, because they don't have that Jack Kaiser that's going to be playing in his 70th game. When all is said and done, I would say the highest ceiling is probably Kingston. And that is not a shot at the other two, because I think Drake Bowen and Jaden Osbury have extremely high ceilings. But Kingston has the opportunity to play at will this upcoming season. He has the opportunity to start at Mike whenever that opportunity crosses his plate. So I think Kingston would probably be considered the best of the three. And that's where I'm at. But Drake Bowen is poised to have a monster season. I expect Jaden Osbury to pick up right where he left off. I have an article out right now that's discussing Kingston Viliamas and what his impact is going to be this immediate year. But the linebacker situation at Notre Dame is going to be really, really solid for the next couple of years, and I expect that to keep up, especially with the addition of Matt Faramo. He's an early enrollee. He's already on campus, and then Thomas Davis Jr. is already in the 26 class, and he'll be filtering in as well. And so linebacker was not going to be a concern for me at Notre Dame for quite some time. But when all is said and done, I would say that it would probably be Kingston, because he brings a lot of things to the table: size, speed, athleticism. He can cover. He can make plays off the edge. He can do it all from that spot. And I'm really, really excited to see what he does this year. That is for sure. Final two questions in here. Salty Virginia Peanuts. How impactful will time missed or restricted in spring practice by Will Pauling be for his development with the Irish QBs? We talked about it a little bit earlier when you asked about the spring practice injuries in general. I don't think it will be too impactful, if I'm being honest. Will Pauling will still be able to practice and go through drills. I think some of his pitch count is going to be more of, I don't know how much we're going to see from him in the blue gold game. I'll be interested to see how much participation he has in the Jersey scrimmage. I believe that a couple weeks before what the spring game is slotted to be. And so that's where I'm at with Will Pauling. He has enough experience that I don't think it's really going to hinder him. Looking at it on the flip side of the coin, I think it's going to be extremely impactful for some of the younger guys to step up and have their moments in the spring. There is a question of where Will Pauling is going to play in the offense. And he played slot at Wisconsin. And right now I believe that position is held down by Jaden Greathouse, because he performed the best this past season from the slot. I think it's going to have to take a heck of a performance from Will Pauling to kind of dethrone Greathouse from that. Now, also take into consideration that I do believe that Mike Denbrock is going to move the receivers around a lot more than what he did last season. I think you could see Malachi Fields changing where he lines up from time to time. I think you're going to see a lot of switching up between field and the slot. I think tight ends are going to be flexed out and used a little bit more in the slot or on the perimeter. So I don't think it's going to impact him too much, Salty, but I do think it's going to be impactful for the younger guys like Cam Williams, like KK Smith, like a Logan Saldate, like a Micah Gilbert to get in and rotate in and get some meaningful snaps, with Will Pauling still being around and participating in drills to help kind of pass down some of the knowledge that he has. And so I don't think it's going to be that impactful for him specifically, because he's still going to have all of summer and all of fall camp to build out relationships with whoever the quarterback is going to be in South Bend on August 31st. Then the final question we have in here from Salty Virginia Peanuts. How impactful will Jared Dawson be this season? I am really high on Jared Dawson, and the analogy that I made was similar to the impact that Javonte Jean-Baptiste had for Notre Dame in 2023. Notre Dame's portal class has brought in a lot of exciting players. They brought in Malachi Fields, who is expected to be a breakout player at the boundary. They brought in Will Pauling, like we just talked about. They brought in Devontae Smith from Alabama, who has a lot of experience, brings a lot of skill, athleticism to the table at the slot corner position. But I think that Jared Dawson is going to be an impactful player on the defensive line. I love the talent and I love the depth in that room. Bodies and number of bodies and the talent in that room is not really a question. The experience level, however, for me is Gabriel Rubio. Last season, he missed last spring. He was away with the team. And then in fall camp, he hurt his foot, which caused him to sit out until the Stanford game, missing the first part of the regular season. Now, he stepped up big in the playoffs and started against Georgia and had a good game. He had a pretty good postseason, but he's going to have to continue to develop. Donovan Heinisch is somebody that came on and stepped up big when Howard Cross went down. In the same game that Howard Cross went down, he ripped off a handful of sacks and then had another one the following week against Virginia. I believe he also started against USC. And then Howard Cross was back for Indiana, but he was pretty limited. So Donovan Heinisch continued to play throughout the postseason. There were multiple times when Howard Cross and Donovan Heinisch were on the field at the same time. Jared Dawson provides, I don't want to call it an insurance policy, but his experience, his depth, and his efficiency while he's playing is, I think, huge. I mean, you go through and you look at some of the numbers that he's had in comparison to what Howard Cross did. He played, let me see. Howard Cross last year ended up playing 200 more pass rushing snaps than what Jared Dawson played last year. And they had the same amount of sacks. Jared Dawson is an extremely effective player. He brings size. I believe he's 6'2". He's over 300 pounds. He's 305, but he's a lot quicker. He has the same quick hands and a really quick first step, very similar to what Howard Cross had, but he's about 20 to 25 pounds heavier. He provides depth. He provides experience. He's played in big moments. He's played a lot against similar opponents to what Notre Dame has faced as well. And so for me, I think his impact is going to be huge. I don't think that he's going to go and he's going to have a 10-sack season. And at the end of the year, when everything is all said and done, we talk about how Jared Dawson was more impactful than a Malachi Fields. But I think he's going to be a really integral piece to this defense being a stout run defense. That is one thing, that is one major improvement that I hope that Chris Ash brings to South Bend, is being a better run defense. Because calling a spade, the pass defense was fantastic. That didn't really help them against Penn State and Ohio State. They gave up over 200 rushing yards in both games. And that's something that's going to have to change if Notre Dame wants to get over that hump. But I do believe Jared Dawson will be an impactful player for the Irish this fall. That is for sure. Well, all right, folks, that is going to do it. Little brief preview of our Friday free-for-all mailbag, which will be going on tomorrow at 1 p.m. Sean Davis and I will be going live for that. So make sure that you bring all of your questions, comments, concerns to that chat, and we'll be able to get everything rolling from there. Brian is still chilling in the Bahamas. He's having a great vacation so far, but he will be back next week, and him and I will be off again, rolling as always. I believe IB Nation Sports Talk goes live tonight at 5 p.m. Sean Stiers right now is currently where the ACC women's tournament is. So until tomorrow, guys, please be sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, share this podcast with your friends and family. As always, supporting us, the best way to do that is subscribe to the premium message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. I'll have some more pieces coming out later today from Mike Martin's press conference. I'm going to write a little bit of a recap. I don't know if anybody was following, but Notre Dame's men's basketball team clinched their spot in the ACC tournament last night with a really exciting, it was an ugly game, but Cole Serta hit a three as time was expiring. It wasn't necessarily a buzzer beater, but there was still under 5 seconds left on the clock. Hit a 3-point shot to put Notre Dame up by 2, and they sealed their bid to the ACC tournament. So I'll have a piece coming out about that later today as well. Until tomorrow, we will see you back here very soon on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.